Wow, it is 22%. 22% critically on Rotten Tomatoes. I finally watched Dark Phoenix. I know it's been years. I was excited for this movie when it first came out, and recently, on the place where there are exclusively bladed cooling devices, imagine a place, if you will, a place where you can go to be cool, but also it's very hot. Imagine this place, a place where you can go to watch films along with me. I don't show the entire film. I play the film. You watch it with me on your end. We talk while we watch. Anyways, that's what I did. I watched it on that amazing magical place with my community, and it surprised me. I thought this movie was going to be one of the worst X-Men movies I would have ever seen, based on a lot of the reviews I heard at the time, which is why I honestly didn't see it at the time. I still really wanted to watch it, and I own the DVD, actually, although I watched it on Disney Plus, where it is. If you would like to watch before you jump into this review, you are welcome to. But yeah, for this retro review, I gotta say, interesting. Let's talk about it. Dark Phoenix is this film that, to me, just had such a bad rap when it came out. A lot of people on the internet were saying that it was like one of the worst movies ever. It was just not. I mean, let me just read to you. 22% on Rotten Tomatoes for the critics, 64% for the audience score. So mid, but also apparently the worst film, like one of the worst films ever. 22% is very low. 388 reviews is what that's based off of. The critic consensus is Dark Phoenix ends an era of the X-Men franchise by taking a second stab at adapting a classic comics arc with deeply disappointing results. Now, I have always felt that Dark Phoenix could be a challenging story to adapt because it's kind of, I mean, it's very comic booky, is I guess the issue that I have with it. And how do you ground that? Like, how do you make it feel grounded when you're doing a live action adaptation with real people, real characters who are supposed to feel like people? Like, they have superpowers, but they're supposed to feel like people. And I think that can be challenging. So I was expecting it to be really corny. That's what I was expecting, based on everything I've seen. Some of the rotten reviews are, the spectacle is entertaining up to a point, but even the digital wizardry wears thin, and Dark Phoenix turns into a standard brand miasma of explosions, collisions, and swirling force fields. That's Joe Morgenstern of the Wall Street Journal. I can't in good conscience recommend that anyone spend their hard-earned money to go see this film in theaters, but if you are a die-hard X-Men fan like me, you might find that it's a surprisingly fun ride. Ash Jefferson. They still even only gave it a 3 out of 10. So, yeah, fun, but apparently not fun enough, and definitely not worth the money, is what they were saying. Kristen Bates from But Why Though, a Geek Community, wrote, "This is not the movie that Dark Phoenix deserves." Dark Phoenix ends up being what everyone feared it would be, a movie that didn't matter at all. One that didn't even try to pay homage to an extraordinary saga that notably influenced the comic book genre. That's Manuel Salbento from MSB Reviews. My apologies if I didn't say that right. So that's where we're at. People just basically felt like it was terrible. Someone just wrote, it felt terribly, terribly scrappy. I don't know what you want from a Dark Phoenix movie, but for me, this was pretty good. And I have to say, it being the second time we've adapted it into live action, I thought it did an admirable job. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the good and the bad. So, starting off, I will say there is a pen analogy that happens in this movie, where at the beginning we see Jean's origin story, and I thought they actually made it a lot more powerful, because in the comics what happens to Jean is her best friend, well, I mean, both of these are really powerful, but this just makes it even more directly linked. It's just a better live action adaptation, I think. Her best friend ends up getting hit by a car when she's young and passes away, and Jean, her powers manifest at that time, and she psychically links to her friend as she's basically moving on. She tries to hold her there for a minute, but the darkness gets too close, and basically her friend slips away and passes away. And because of this traumatizes Jean and makes her withdraw into herself and really messes her up mentally. The only person that ends up being able to help young Jean is Professor X. Professor X takes her in. She also helps him build Cerebro, and he ends up putting mental blocks in her mind to shield her. And that is kind of what ends up going on. And there may have also been some mental blocks in place in the comics where she didn't remember that happening. And then years later, she goes to the school and yada, 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 X-Men. In this version of the story, Jean has parents. Her parents end up getting into a car accident, and it's because of Jean's powers. Jean's powers go kind of crazy. She can hear too many things. It makes her overwhelmed, and she causes her parents to fall asleep. They get into this crazy car crash. Her mom passes away, and at the beginning of the movie, you're led to believe that her dad also passes away. But I didn't think he actually did, because I felt like I could see him moving a little bit. So I was like, I think he's fine, but her mom has definitely passed away. So when Xavier first talks to her, Charles comes in, and she is basically in a place where she doesn't think she deserves any help because she feels terrible for what she's done. She knows what she's done, but no one's told her yet. And he basically comes and tells her, yeah, your parents are gone. I know who you are, and I know what's going on for you. And she says, I shouldn't, like, she basically feels like she shouldn't even exist. Like, her powers are terrible, they're evil, they're awful. And Xavier gives her this pen analogy where he goes, I could give you this pen. Here, actually, just take this pen. And he says, if you have this pen, you could do whatever you want with it. You could create, you could write, you could do anything. You could also hurt someone with a pen. You could stab them with a pen, you could do terrible things. But at the end of the day, it's just a pen. And that's the pen analogy. I thought this pen analogy was kind of corny, but other than that, I was like, I get it. I get what you're putting down, and I think the emotional idea of what's happening there makes a lot of sense. So Jean ends up going with Charles. She goes into the school. He basically raises her from this young age. I think she's like 8 or 9. I think she's 9 in the film, which is pretty in line with what the age she is in the comics. It ranges from, I think, like 6 to 12, depending on the retelling that we're having of it. And yeah, grows up, becomes part of the X-Men, and then one day they got to go to space to help some astronauts. And when they go to space, Phoenix Force, and then basically in saving the people that are in the ship, the Phoenix attaches to Jean. And her powers are what allow them to save the astronauts and hold the ship together. Really, really cool stuff. Really liked that. I wasn't sure if we were going to go to space or if the Phoenix was going to come to Earth, because I just thought, wow, going to space is like, might be too comic booky, but I thought they did it in a really good way. And I also loved the tension between Mystique and Charles, where Mystique is trying to basically be the team leader, keep the team together, keep everybody safe, and is questioning Charles when he says, no, like, there's more astronauts, like, you guys have to save them, you have to get everyone, you can't leave anyone behind. And that's because Charles knows if we leave anyone behind, that's all that'll make the headline. But if we save everyone, we're mutants and we save people, and that's so good for us as a people, which I love the idea of. Honestly, I think it's so great, that tension between the two of them. And we get back to Earth, and Jean ends up being okay, but everyone's kind of concerned because, you know, she seemed like she was dead, and there was an explosion, and she seems weird. And when Beast checks her, her power levels are off the charts. Like, he literally doesn't have a chart for that level of power. So he clears her, but he's even like, I don't know about that. That seems a little weird. Things start getting wonky. And when they come back even, Professor X and Mystique have this conversation, and I love how much she calls him out for basically being irresponsible and trying to push his own agenda while not really caring about the people that he's putting in harm's way, the actual mutants. Like, he says he's fighting for all of mutant kind, but what about the individuals, you know? And this conflict that comes up in the film, I think, is really great. And I think it highlights a lot of other stuff in the comics, not necessarily Dark Phoenix, but I just really loved that we got that element of the story, and I thought it added to it and made it feel more organic in a lot of ways. Because the story is about Jean becoming the Phoenix and then the Dark Phoenix, but it's also as much about this conflict between her past, how she sees herself, and the fact that to protect her, Charles kept so much from her. And that's what triggers the Dark Phoenix in the story. And I just thought that was so smart. Like, that's not what happens in the comics. In the comics, mastermind is kind of what sets her off, like messing with her head. And this just feels actually more emotionally strong as a choice. It makes more sense for the characters. It gives them more to do with each other, and I just thought it was pretty cool. When Jean does turn dark, however, her hair likes to go like this in the movie. It's like, it looks like she's underwater. And I understand it's supposed to be like, oh, the air is like blowing her hair. But honestly, I feel like I would have rather they just got a fan and did this real world, because it does not look good. That was the only thing I really didn't like in terms of the effects and the stylistic choice to show how the Phoenix has hold of her and is turning her dark. Her eyes and everything were cool. I liked that. That was cool. But the hair, I don't know about that. I also thought Mystique's death was very powerful. There was a lot of moments that I actually felt emotion in this movie, and I think everyone that was acting was doing a great job. And I don't know if this film got flack as well, because Jennifer Lawrence at this point was basically done with Mystique and was just over it because she hated putting on the makeup. But I still feel like she did a good job in the movie. She delivered, and I still have always liked her as Mystique. I think she does a good job. So I don't know if people had an issue with that, or the fact that she was killed off in this movie and that was part of it, but I actually really liked that part. I thought they did it really well, with Mystique basically trying to talk Jean down, and then Jean being afraid and her fear being what makes her lash out and lose control, and then she kills Mystique. And this idea that Mystique was willing to put herself, like, didn't care that she was putting herself in danger. And Jean feels like it's like trauma again from her past, because she's like reminded of how her power is dangerous, when really it's all in how she uses it. And it's really about her embracing her trauma and her emotions so she can move forward. That's a powerful story, like, for a character to tell. There's also elements of sort of feminist themes in this, I think, with this idea of like the aliens that come, which are the Dabari, which in the comics, the Dabari are a race that Jean as the Phoenix, or really the Phoenix, because later we learn the Phoenix wasn't even Jean, it was the Phoenix basically copying Jean and pretending to be her. Jean was like under the ocean the entire time. But the Dabari in this, instead of being Jean's like sort of victims, instead of being the people that she terrorizes as Dark Phoenix, they're people that want the Phoenix Force to use it to like destroy worlds. And I just thought that was interesting to sort of add that flip and more of a powerful choice than making Jean necessarily a straight up villain. And at one point, one of the Dabari says to her, "Are you like a little scared girl that's like taking orders from this guy, Charles? Or are you the most powerful creature on this planet?" And just that idea of the fear being what rules you, but also not wanting to be in that power because it's scary to embrace your power as a woman and also as a person. So this isn't just like a feminist theme. This is also something that can speak, I think, to everyone, which is also why I found it to be such a powerful feminist theme, because I think it translates to a lot of people. Like, we all have fear of our own power, I think, at times. Especially for women that can be a thing, but I think it can also kind of be a thing for everybody. Being afraid of your emotions, you know? And terrible things that you've experienced. That's scary. We also get Genosha in this. At one point, Jean goes to visit Magneto. He's on Genosha. I thought that was really cool, and that was included. And yeah, it was just like a cool look at the world that he's building. Everyone in this was just also really good in their roles. Like I said, Professor X is constantly being called out for being a butt. And at one point, there's a really good scene between him and Hank, where Hank basically says that he's responsible for Mystique's death, which is true, because Hank was trying to shoot Jean and Charles held him back, was trying to, I think, stun her too. I don't think he was even trying to kill her or anything. He was just trying to knock her out. And Charles is like, no, let Mystique talk to her, and that's what prompts her death. And there's constant moments in this where people are like, Charles, you need to stop. Like, you need to rein yourself in and look. You are the person that's being responsible for these things. And he's like, no, I'm not responsible. Like, these are just things that are happening. I'm just trying to protect people. So the fact that he has to kind of acknowledge that and apologize to Jean, and she also acknowledges the fact that she believes he was trying to help her, because that is the truth of Professor X, I think. He does a lot of things because he thinks it's the best choice. But at the end of the day, it's like you can't control everyone, which is like such a telepath, such like a psionic issue, you would think too, with somebody that can like control people's minds and hear their thoughts. There's a really great moment where Jean also fights Magneto and fights Charles, and with Magneto she almost crushes his head with his own helmet just to prove how powerful she is as Phoenix, and it was like, whoa, I can't, when he comes to kill her because she killed Mystique. And then for Charles, she makes him walk. She's like, oh my gosh, walk to me. And he's like, I can't, you know I can't. And she lifts him up. That was like so hard to watch, but it was so compelling. I don't know. I just felt like it was so terrible and so brutal. I thought they were both really good fight moments. Also, Ty Sheridan as Scott Summers as Cyclops is amazing. He like really nails this character. He gets Scott in a way that is so refreshing. I just feel like both him and Sophie Turner as Jean are fantastic. And yeah, I mean, I just feel like we were so lucky with a lot of the casting in these movies. It's just like everyone's really good. Also, at one point when they're in the final fight between the Dabari, Kurt like just goes nuts because they killed this guy who said that like his son used to be a fan of Nightcrawlers, and now he's like, and now like you guys are evil, because basically the humans think, well, I mean, the X-Men were fighting, and because of that they created a lot of collateral damage, and so the government turns on them, and even though they've done all of these good things, is basically like, nope, doesn't matter, you guys are bad, and now we have an excuse, and we're gonna come basically get you all. When really what they don't realize is that the Dabari are there, and if they don't have the X-Men to defend them, the Dabari will come and destroy the whole world. So they're trying to get the Phoenix Force and just like blow everything up. I mean, we don't really go into a lot of the why behind that for the Dabari. They say that their world was destroyed, but I don't even think that's a true story. So that's the only thing I feel like we could have more of. And yeah, this film isn't perfect. There are moments when it's kind of corny. It is very comic booky, but it's not in a way that's bad. I think it's in a way that's actually really fun, and really in a way that understands the characters and adapts it in a good way for live action. So I'm really confused about why people didn't like it. Also, at the end of the movie, they have this final fight with the Dabari, and Jean sacrifices herself to save her family, the X-Men. And the head of the Dabari, the woman that she's fighting, you know, says like, you can't, if you take me out, you're gonna hurt everybody else, because we're both gonna be destroyed and it will destroy the earth. So Jean takes her up, and this woman also says to her, your emotions make you weak. Like the fact that you care about all these people here, the X-Men, the earth, that's what makes you weak, because you can't defeat me because you're gonna hurt them. Ha 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 ha. But Jean, of course, takes her to space and says, my emotions make me strong. And she sacrifices herself to save everyone. And that is such a Jean thing, and that is such a Jean response. And this idea of Jean coming into her power by embracing her emotions is, wow, that is just so Jean to me. Like, Jean's power is her empathy and is her ability to feel emotion and accept it. And that's what makes her such a great hero. But her emotions also are kind of tied to her powers in a way, and it's scary. I mean, it's kind of a similar thing to Rogue in a way. And I love both of those characters, and that's part of it. So at the end, Jean sacrifices herself. We see her turn into the Phoenix. She probably could have come back if we really wanted, to be honest. But it was still a powerful moment, knowing that she made that choice, not knowing what would happen to her. And the school is named the Jean Grey School, like in the comics, like how it becomes the Jean Grey School in the comics. And it made me so happy to see that homage. And yeah, I just thought it was great. Also, Dazzler is in this, which I liked, except that it wasn't really my favorite version. Like, I probably would have done Dazzler a little bit different. And the music she was singing sounded weirdly modern for the fact that I think this is supposed to take place in like the 90s. Yeah, the 90s. 1992 is when it's supposed to be. And she's kind of singing music like she's in, I mean, 2015, maybe 2019. I mean, she still looks like she's from the 70s, so that part's a little weird. But at the same time, I was happy Dazzler was in it, and I wish she got more to do, and I wish we had maybe done a little bit of a better adaptation, but that's okay. because I'll just take any Dazzler I can get. Dazzler movie win. So that, my friends, is my thoughts on Dark Phoenix. Should you watch it? Yes. Should you have gone to see it in theaters? Maybe. I'm not sure if it still is a film that needs to be seen in theaters, but I gotta say, it was a pretty good X-Men movie. Definitely not the worst one. I don't think it's deserving of 22%. Whew. I would basically give this, I would say, a solid 3 Phoenix Forces out of 5. I feel like that's pretty solid. It was good. I enjoyed it. It was fun. It's emotional. It's X-Men. You should watch it. Well, that's all I have to say. All right, friends. Stay nerdy.